Alright, adding and subtracting fractions. While adding and subtracting regular numbers is usually a pretty simple thing, this is pretty complicated and probably one of the hardest things to do with fractions. Weirdly, multiplying and dividing are easier. Anyway, let's get stuck into it. So first step is to find the lowest common multiple, which is not the Rice crispy bar thing. We are looking for the lowest number that both of the denominators go into. And I guess I'll just have to show you that in practice because it's a bit weird. But let's start off just by simplifying these first two fractional expressions. So if we have the same common denominator, or the same denominator, in this case 9, we can just add our numerators together. So 2 plus 4 is 6 over 9. And there's one more step we have to do with this question. Because we've got a common factor, 3 goes into both 6 and 9. Oops, 3 there, sorry. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. So that's our fully simplified expression. 11 over 12 minus 3 over 12. Again, we've got common denominators already, so we can just subtract 3 from 11, which gives us 8. Our denominator doesn't change, so 8 over 12. And again, we've got a common factor that goes into 8 and 12, which is 4. And 4 goes into 8 2 times, and into 12 3 times. I'll grab these questions from the textbook, and they're looking very similar. Alright, here's where it gets a bit tricky. We don't have a common denominator here. 2 is not the same number as 4, as I'm sure you're aware, so we need to make it the same. So the lowest number that both 2 and 4 goes into, the lowest common multiple for 2 and 4, is in fact 4. So all we have to do here is multiply both of these values by 2. And if we rewrite this, 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 over 4. We've not changed anything there. And now we've got the same denominator, so we can do 2 plus 1, which is 3, all over 4. Our denominator doesn't change. Let's have a look at this next step here. Alright, getting a bit trickier now. So the lowest common multiple, sometimes it's easier to just write out the multiples of these denominators. So I've got 4, 8, 12, 16, that's for 4. And for 6 we've got 6, 12, 18. And I'm going to stop there because I've got the same multiple of 12 for both of these values here. And again, this is a bit tricky. So we need to get both of these denominators up to 12. And I know that 4 times 3 will get us to 12, but I also need to do 3 times 3 here. And 6 times 2 gets us to 12. So I'm going to multiply those fractions just like that. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 3 being 12. 5 times 2 is 10. And 6 times 2 is 12. And now that we have these common denominators, we can add our numerators. So 9 plus 10 is 19. Over our denominator doesn't change, 12. And if we wanted to write that as a mixed number, 12 goes into 19 just once. And the difference between 12 and 19 is 7. And we've left with 7/12. Bit of a tricky one. Alright, let's have a look at this next one here. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with 15 and 10. So my multiples of 15 are 15, 30, 45. Multiples of 10, we've got 10, 20, 30. And I'm going to stop there because I've got my common multiple of 30. So 15 times 2 gets us to 30. We need to multiply both of these. 10 times 3 gets us to 30. So my goal here is, of course, still to get these denominators to be the same number. 4 times 2 is 8 over 30. 3 times 3 is 9. And 10 times 3 over 30. And now again we've got our common denominator, so 8 plus 9 is 17, and our denominator doesn't change, over 30. By making these fractions bigger, I know we did this with simplifying fractions, we could make them smaller and it didn't really change the value of our fraction. So by making these fractions bigger, we're not actually changing them at all, we're just changing the look of them so we can add them or subtract them in this next case. Okay, 5 and 8, it's always a tricky one. So I'm going to write out my multiples of 5, which is 5, 10, 15, I might need to do a few of these, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. And let's do our multiples of 8. So we've got 8, 16, 24, 32, and 40. So that was a whole long way to get to our lowest common multiple. But this is a good little question, because if you're ever stuck, you can use the denominator from the other fraction. So in this case, I'm going to multiply 5 by 8 and 2 by 8. Oops, it's an 8 there. And 3 by 5 and 8 by 5. So if you're not sure how to get to the lowest common multiple, you can use the opposing denominator. So in this case, 8 for this fraction on the left and 5 for the fraction on the right. So 2 times 8 is 16 and 5 times 8 is 40. 3 times 5 is, oops, minusing here, is 15, and 8 times 5 is 40, as we found before. And because we're subtracting, we're now doing 16 minus 15, which is 1, and our denominator doesn't change, so it stays at 40. Alright, these guys can be a little tricky. I think our best bet is to leave them as mixed numbers in this case. So I'm going to add the 3 with the 2, because I've got those as whole numbers. 3 plus 2 is 5, and then I'm going to work with the fractions, so 1/7 plus 2/7, just adding the numerators, so 1 plus 2 is 3 over 7. That's our final answer there. Can't simplify that or anything with that one. Let's do the same thing here, so 6 minus 2 is 4, and we've got a bit of a problem here. I'm going to write it like this, because we're going to keep going on this one. I can't just subtract 1/12 from 5/6, because I don't have a common denominator. So what I'm going to do is multiply this by 2 and this by 2. And let's see what that does for me. So that gets me to 5 times 2 is 10, 6 times 2 is 12, minus 1 over 12. So my goal up here was to get the denominator to 12, and by multiplying the whole left-sided fraction by 2, we get to the same denominator. And then 10 minus 1 is 9 over 12. We can simplify this a little bit further. We're left with 4, and 3 goes into 9 and 12, leaving us with 3/4 as our final simplified fraction. Well, this is a long lesson, sorry. Last one. 7 minus 3 is 4, and then we've got 1/6 minus 3/4. I'm not sure what multiple I'm going to try and get to, or what I'm going to use here, so I'm just going to multiply this by 4, and this by 4, and this by 6, and this by 6. And all I'm doing is grabbing those numbers from here and here. I'm not really thinking too much about it, I'm just going for that. And the way that that works now is we end up with 4 over 24 minus 18 over 24. So we get that common denominator. But we've got a bit of a problem here. We need to borrow 1 from our whole number out the front here. So this is kind of combining a bit of everything that we've done so far. So I can write this as 3, and if we're borrowing 1, it's the same as 24 over 4. So what I'm going to do here is actually write 28 over 4 minus 18 over, oops, sorry, 24 there. So what we've done there, if I just jump out over here, is if we borrow 1 from our front and we've got 4 over 24, when we were writing that as a improper fraction, we would do 1 times 24 plus 4 over 24, and 1 times 24 is 24 plus 4 over 24, and that's where we get that 28 over 24. That's about as hard as these get, and yes, they are pretty tricky, but you just have to practice these as many times as you can. Now we're at the easy part, so 28 minus 18 is 10. We've got a 24 there. And I can see these are both even numbers, so I'm going to start dividing by 2. And that gives us 3 and 5 twelfths. And there's nothing that goes into 5 and 12, so that's all we can do with that question. There are some different ways to do addition and subtraction of fractions. I might make another video just to go through those. But basically, you've got to get your common denominator. The denominator has to be the same before you can add or subtract these fractions. That's your first step. And then you can just start working with your numerators, adding and subtracting those values, depending on what the question's asking.